So, when observing a painting, an important part of observing, or an important element that we would want to observe, is light, how it interacts with the canvas as a whole and how it interacts with each element inside of it. So, how do you observe light? How do you do this? I don't, even though I think there are some ways that probably wouldn't make much sense on how to do it, I don't think there's exactly like a right way to do it. But I think there are some questions that can help you start thinking a little bit about how light is working on the canvas. At least they help me to, to do that. So, for example, a good first question that may not always be the best first question, but in this case, for example, in this painting called Bodegón con plato de cerezas, ciruelas, jarra y queso, it can be a good starting question, which is, where's the light coming from? Let's try to solve that question. But first, how do we know where light comes from in the world outside of the canvas? First, let's try to answer that. Well, I mean, you could always look at the light source directly, right? And you would be able to say, well, that's the light source, right? But what if you aren't able to look directly at the source, or you aren't able to exactly locate the source? Then the way you understand where the light source is coming from is by looking at how light is interacting with the other objects, and looking at which parts are illuminated and which aren't, because that will tell you the direction from where the light's coming from. So a good question to answer the previous question can be, what parts of the painting are illuminated, or what objects inside of the painting are illuminated, if any, or if everything is illuminated. So first, let's see. We can see that the jar seems to be more darker on the right side than on the left side. So we can say that the jar is illuminated, right? But only on the left side, or mostly on the left side. We can also say that about the cheese. We can see that the face that's facing the plate with the cherries has a lighter color, while has a lighter tone, sorry, while the part that is not facing the plate has a darker one. We can also see a little bit of it, even though it's a little bit harder with the cherries. We can see the little white reflection things, which I won't get too much because I think that step by step. Let's wait. But we can see that, for example, the cherries are casting a shadow onto the cheese. So by looking at it, I think it's pretty safe to conclude that the light source is coming from the left. Probably a little bit elevated, but not that much, because also the little part that we can see of the inside of the jar also tells us a little bit about how the light is working. We can see that the first part where water is poured when you, for example, pour the water from a jar to a glass, seems to be a little bit darker than the part closer to the handle of the jar. So that probably tells us that the light is coming in a way that part is still casted into a shadow, but that part is being illuminated. So probably a little bit up. So now that we know where the light source is coming from, we can ask ourselves, how is light interacting with these subjects besides what we already discussed, which is by illuminating them, right? For example, when we talked about the cherries, another clue that the cherries gave us about the light source was the little white dots that seem to indicate reflection, which also the jar seems to have, as well as the fruits on the other side of the plate of the cherries. These little white things indicate us, as previously said, that these subjects are reflecting the light. So we can see that these objects inside of the canvas are reflective objects, while, for example, the cheese doesn't have exactly this white little dots that indicate reflection, right? So we can say, for example, that the cheese is not a reflective surface in this painting, right? Also, the plate doesn't seem to have them that much as well, even though it's, you could see that it does have it a little bit faintly, but not as notably as, for example, the jar, right? So we must always remember that the canvas, even though for example, in this example, is trying to imitate part of the real world, it's not the real world. So it doesn't really have a light source. It doesn't really have reflective objects, so to speak. It's more of an illusion of the light and an illusion of the reflective objects. So a next good question to ask ourselves would be, how does the artist, with the use of the materials, through the use of the materials and the colors, achieves this illusion of light? Well, we talked about first, we first talked about the parts that were illuminated and the parts that weren't illuminated. How did we know that those parts were and weren't illuminated? Well, we can see that, for example, the part closer to the handle of the jar seems to have darker tones. So we can say that the artist used darker tones to indicate the absence of light, or in the cheese as well, we can see two faces that were, if they were illuminated equally, they would probably have the same colors, the same values of colors, but one seems to have the darker values, even though you can still see that it probably holds the same kind of colors, like some kind of white on the upper part, and then the part of the part below that part is a bit more yellow, while the part that is facing the cherry seems to have lighter tones. So we can say that through value, the artist is achieving this illusion of light. Also, how did we know that they were reflecting, that these objects were reflecting the light? Again, the little white dots. So, I mean, it comes a little bit intuitive. If we know that darker values seem to represent the absence of light, then lighter values will represent the presence of light, and a white will represent pretty much light itself. In this case, in reflection, the light is reflected and thus those parts are white. So with the use of whites, you can also give a texture or a feeling of the characteristics of the elements in the painting. For example, the jar, the cherries, and the fruits being reflective and the cheese being not reflective, even though they are all interacting with the same light, but they are not interacting in the same way. Then, after we analyze how light behaves in the painting, we can do all other sorts of things, like ask ourselves, why did the artist create light this way in the painting? Why did the artist make light interact with the elements in this way? And how does this interaction affect the way you experience the painting? For example, you can say that, at least in my case, the first thing that caught my attention was a jar. Uh, and I think that part of it is because of the shininess of the jar. You can see that it's probably the most reflective object of all the painting. And also, even though it also probably has to do with its size and other compositional decisions, right? But as you can see, the light plays a very important role. In some other paintings, it probably has more symbolic meaning. So answering all and understanding all of the questions that we asked before would probably help you have a better understanding of why the artist took those decisions. What is the meaning of light, if there is any meaning in the canvas? And it can also help you understand better how to use light in your own paintings. For example, another very interesting observation here is that the jar, the reflection in the jar seems to be curved. We know this because the white the white stain that seems to indicate reflection changes size as it's bigger on this side and a little bit smaller on this side. So it gives a sensation that it's curved. So we can also see we can also kind of see a part of the room through the yard, which is also, I think, part of why it's so attractive to the eye. Well, I don't think I have much else to say about light, at least not in this painting or right now. But I would say it's a very good start on how to analyze light, and I hope it helps you or it helps someone. I don't know. But that's that.